Good evening, hope you're well. Now look, I'm sorry for the update, but this is the biggest national security threat we have faced in decades, and we seem to be the only broadcaster who wants to talk about it properly. A further 408 illegal migrants landed in Britain yesterday in 9 small boats. 211 arrived the day before, and that was on top of the 614 the day before that. That's more than 1,200 in just 3 days. What happened to this fighting talk then from the Prime Minister?
I'm not going to take lectures from Rishi Sunak about our borders. Record numbers of people are coming here in small boats. He's lost control of our borders, literally lost control, not only of the numbers that are coming, but also who's coming. And so this is not just a border issue, it's a national security issue.
I'm glad he agrees it's a national security issue, but I'm still waiting to see what Labour are going to do about it. Smash the gangs, smash the gangs. Yes, I've heard it all before, plenty of times. But when will that start to manifest, Prime Minister? Well, listen to the Mail on Sunday columnist Dan Hodges tomorrow, and he'll bizarrely try and convince you Labour is winning the small boats battle. It's headlined, Labour has drawn first blood in the small boats battle. Dan Hodges goes on to write, in reality, the actual figures show Starmer is performing slightly better than his predecessors up until this point. Our new Prime Minister hit the dubious milestone of 6,000 new arrivals on August the 27th, the 54th day of his premiership. Liz Truss reached it after just 29 days. Rishi Sunak after 38. Is that something Labour and their supporters are meant to be proud of, or that we should celebrate? Because that's still 6,000 undocumented people, mainly young men, who have arrived in this country illegally. Who cares if they came a week or two later under Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss? So while this charade continues, who's there to actually hold Keir Starmer and Labour to account? His Majesty's official opposition, of course, is the Conservative Party, rather. But they're proving as useless in opposition as they were in government. At this point, the Tories are a totally pointless entity. Where is Rishi Sunak? The last I saw, he was rubbing shoulders with Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, as you can see here, the day after the election, and having a right old laugh about it in Parliament. Then he trotted off to California for frozen yoghurt by the Pacific.
We have 48 hours to save Britain from the danger of a Labour government. We have got to make sure that Britain does not sleepwalk into this. It is our job, it is our duty to spend the next 48 hours waking everyone up to the danger of a Labour government.
Rishi warned us about the calamity Labour had in store, then he disappeared when it mattered the most. So is it a surprise that people think politics is just one big game, one big club that you and I aren't a part of? As Camilla Tominey eloquently puts in tomorrow's newspaper, the Sunday Telegraph, the useless Tories are betraying the British public once again. Keir Starmer is looking for more things to ban, while his Chancellor looks for more things to tax. And the only thing worse than Labour, she writes, is Labour unopposed. But let's get the thoughts of my panel tonight. Journalist and commentator Benedict Spence, radio and TV broadcaster Alex Dyke, and the anarchist and academic Dr. Lisa Mackenzie. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Benedict, let's start with you. Where are the Tories? They have gone missing in action, and do you agree they are as useless in opposition as they were in government?
I mean, I could sum that up really quickly by going, no idea and and then we could move on to something else. I mean, honestly, I don't think people should be surprised, though. I mean, given the performance of the Tories in the last few years of government, why should anybody expect anything different from them in opposition? You don't get anywhere near the amount of media attention anyway, and given that actually we've got 6 people running to be the leader, and none of them are particularly exciting, I'm not surprised that none of them are really able to cut through with whatever they have to say in terms of criticism of the government. I mean, we wait to see even if whoever they end up selecting as leader in a couple of months' time will be able to have any sort of meaningful impact. But ultimately, they've created this mess. Most people recognise that they create this mess.
And they've just done a runner.
Yeah, and I think that as much as you can criticise the Labour Party, and people will criticise the Labour Party rightly for having promised sort of quite competent managerialism and then waltzed in and not seemingly had much of a plan, people ultimately are going to remember for a very long time who it was who left them with the mess.
Alex Dyke, do you agree with Camilla Tominey tomorrow that the Tories have once again, as she writes, betrayed Britain?
No, I don't. And sometimes I think it's best, Ben, to do nothing. When you've got Keir Starmer putting his foot in it every time he opens his mouth and digging himself a big hole. Maybe it's best just to stand back and wait. It's a long ramp. You know, we got to get to November. It's a long time. By then, there'll be no winter fuel allowance. Taxes, we all know, are going to go up if they haven't gone up by then. And people will be champing at the bit to hear what the new Tory leader's got to say.
Good point. Lisa, when your enemy's doing something wrong, you know, and they're hanging themselves with their own rope, just leave them to it.
No, I don't think so. I think the damage that he particularly is doing at the moment, we've got people sat in police cells for weeks and weeks on end, on bail. They've not even been charged with, you know, they've not been found guilty. We've got the winter fuel payments that are going to go. How many pensioners aren't going to make this winter? I think when we've got a situation where we have now, you've got to have a proper opposition. And I've got to say the only opposition I've seen in the last 8 weeks has been Elon Musk. Which has been quite incredible, that the opposition...
And GB News. And GB News.
And GB News, yes. I was speaking to one of my friends last night about this, and we were saying that GB News, some of the other right-wing newspapers, The Telegraph in particular, and Elon Musk has been in place as His Majesty's opposition.
Yeah, and what does that say? A South African migrant to America now championing Brits from, you know, his Texas... he doesn't live in I was going to say mansion. He doesn't live in a mansion, infamously. But it's you know, and I say GB News not to blow our own trumpet.
No.
It does seem like we are the only, at least, broadcaster who seems to really care about this issue, particularly of the small boats, Benedict, properly.
I think, I mean, there are other broadcasters. We should put that out there in the interest of balance. There are some others. Honestly, I mean, when it comes to the idea of, you know, there only being people on social media or media outlets being the official opposition, it is true up to a point. Although, you know, I would question whether Elon Musk entirely is aware of what's going on. I think actually what he does is largely for engagement on his own social media platform, because actually that's a very good thing for Elon Musk's social media platform. You know, he's taken a particular interest in Brazil this week for very obvious reasons. You know, he's sort of taken his eye off what's going on in the UK. But, you know, broadly speaking, I do understand the point about, you know, not wanting to interrupt the Labour Party, sort of let them have a bit of a car crash, have a bit of a ding-dong and see what sort of emerges from the rubble. But the problem with that is, then if you're the future Tory leader and you're, say, Robert Jenrick, and you pop up and people go, oh, yeah, I remember you, didn't you used to be a Liberal? Yeah, I don't really trust you. I've not really heard very much from you. You can pretty much go through every single one. If it's Kemi, it'll be, oh, yes, I remember you. Weren't you very lazy when you were in government? Or if it's Priti Patel, oh, yes, I remember you. Aren't you the one that actually oversaw the large influx of migrants?
But you could say that about anyone from any party.
You can, but this is the time, I think, really to be getting much more on the front foot, be getting a lot more aggressive, because you can't just sort of sit and hope that people forget what you got up to in office and just hope that the other side are worse. I mean, Labour got lucky with that strategy when the Tories did it, but, you know, what are the odds of it actually happening again soon? People
out in the country are extremely angry. I have never known a politician to have such an incredible majority and a rise, and then within weeks, you know, most of the country absolutely despise him.
Oh, but they're just a bunch of far-right bigots, Lisa. You know, who cares about...
I absolutely agree with you, and I didn't think I would, because I read your bio before we came on air tonight, but I absolutely agree with you. And I think the problem for Labour, and particularly for Keir Starmer, is they don't realise what's happening on the streets. They don't realise what public opinion is really like.
Well, I'm glad to see we're all getting on. Let's get the biscuits out and some coffees, and we'll continue as a means to go on. And also, by the way, let's talk about reform. They're not, you know, they've got 5 MPs. They're not the opposition, but they've been pretty quiet in the last couple of weeks as well. Anyway, coming up next, former Tory MP Miriam Cates goes head-to-head with former editor of Labour list Peter Edwards. As well as his popularity ratings plummeting, the headaches continue for Keir Starmer as a cronyism investigation has just landed on his doorstep. It follows Labour Party loyalists being handed unusual civil service appointments by the government using exceptions rules that have caused quite the row in Whitehall. And just remember that civil service appointments are meant to be politically neutral. All departments in Whitehall have now been ordered to declare any exceptional hires since the election by the head of the civil service watchdog, which will then be reviewed by the regulator. Interesting. So tonight I'm asking, as their cronyism row worsens, is it now Labour that is the UK's party of sleaze? Let me know your thoughts by heading to gbnews.com/yoursay or tweet me at gbnews. Joining me now is the former Conservative MP Miriam Cates. Miriam, good evening. We did have a Labour guest booked. Maybe they'll join. I think they're having some connection problems to defend their record, or maybe he just can't defend their record, so that's why he's not coming. But what do you make of this cronyism scandal? Because Starmer and Labour, for years, banged on about the Tory sleaze and the corruption and the, whatever else. And within 55 days, they've done that on steroids.
Well, it certainly doesn't look good, and I'm pleased that there is now an investigation, because it does seem that there were one too many appointments to just be coincidence. So let's see what that investigation throws up. But I think it does beg some very interesting and important questions about our political system. Firstly, how political parties are funded. So as I'm sure your viewers know, political parties are funded almost entirely through donations. So ordinary people, businesses, trade unions giving political parties and also candidates money to help them fight elections. So for me, for example, I stood in the recent election, people gave me money to pay for leaflets and to pay for campaigning. Now, all that is declared, so everybody, you can look on the Electoral Commission website who gave you money, that's fine. But if you didn't have that money, you couldn't campaign. So it's absolutely vital to political parties that they have money from people. The problem then arises if it looks like, or perhaps actually is the case, that politicians are appointing people to jobs because they gave them money. Now, we don't know, of course, that that's true in Labour's case. It may just be that the people they wanted to appoint happened to give them money. Let's wait and see. But it does throw up some very interesting questions about how we keep our civil service and our politics impartial when we so rely on those donations from people to make politics work. So very interesting for Labour, and I don't think it looks good.
I mean, I think it was a charade anyway to suggest the civil service has ever been politically neutral. We saw, their obstruction during, your government's days and before that. But it's not, in Labour's case now, it's not always to do with donations. It's the fact they've hired, for example, former Labour aides, former staffers from Labour think tanks into, as I say, politically neutral civil service roles.
Absolutely, and the civil service has a duty to serve each government equally, and clearly, if it's known that a particular official has strong links to one political party, of course they can't serve the next government neutrally. But you just said, has there ever been an impartial civil service? Now, of course, no individual is perfectly impartial. We all have mixed motives, we all have our own points of view. But I actually do think there was a time when certainly there was a stronger sense of duty in the civil servants to enact what ministers told them to do, elected ministers told them to do, regardless of whether or not they agreed with it. And I think that has broken down. And I think that certainly Conservative ministers had lost trust in the civil service to enact what they told them to do, regardless of their own personal beliefs. And I wouldn't be surprised if actually Labour ministers are feeling the same. Now, of course, we tend to think that civil servants often lean left, and I think that's probably true. But even so, I could quite understand why ministers want to have people in place who support them. But, of course, there are allowed political appointments. They're called special advisors. But absolutely, civil service appointments are not allowed to be political. And that seems to be where Labour might have broken the rules here.